I'm Matt Budd. Let me welcome you to Chat with Matt. The idea I had behind Chat with Matt is to find interesting people with something to say. And today's guest is David Horning, who's going to be talking to us about using humor in leadership. We're going to be trading barbs back and forth, but let me assure you this meeting is no joke. With that as the beginning, my policy has always been to let my guest speaker introduce themselves. The reason being that whenever I've been introduced, people have butchered my background and made me cringe and thrown me off my game, and that's never a good thing to do with a stand-up comic. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to David. I'm going to spotlight him. So as I have comments, we'll be bouncing back in and out on your screen. But I want to thank all of you for the most part showing up on time and coming to chat with Matt. Next Tuesday, we're going to have another chat with Matt. My guest is Todd Churgis. He's written a book, and I hope you'll all sign up. We're going to be announcing that in tonight's newsletter, but it's already out on our website. So with no further ado, I'm going to have David join the screen and really let him take over. Just have to find out where there it is. So I'm going to add a spotlight. David, welcome to Chat with Matt. I'd really be thrilled to have you talk about your background a little bit to start us off, how you got to where you are today. I'm sure you didn't start out in life as a stand-up comedian, but maybe that's true, and you'll tell us.
Oh, I mean, maybe not a professional comedian, but, I've always enjoyed making people laugh. A little bit about my background. I have some strategically placed books back there, so it looks like I'm smarter than I am, as well as a tripod to show you that, yeah, I record myself doing things and I'm technologically advanced. So thank you for that opportunity. A little bit about me. I can't wait to get back on stage, as you can see. Like, doing this virtually has been amazing, but just having that live in-person interaction is fantastic. But I'm happy to see all of your faces that I can see. I've been doing comedy since 2012. I have been speaking since 2014, and I have been speaking well since 2019. So it's been quite a development. I've got the backstory that I was always the class clown.
Excuse me, Matt, somebody asked about enabling the automatic subtitle captions. Can you do that?
Sure.
Okay, so I just wanted to do that before we got too far along. I'm sorry, David.
It's all good. It's all good. I the subtitling. If you've ever subtitled a video or done the automatic subtitling, a lot of times it is so far off and it's so funny. Some of the things that it comes up with.
I don't know where it appears, but I've enabled it. So thank you.
All right. Well, hopefully you can see what I'm saying too, if you're not allowed to be watching this or whatever.
Well, that's a play on words in and of itself, David.
Yeah.
I hope you can see what I'm saying.
Absolutely. And yeah, I've been trying to get people to see what I'm saying for, like I said, almost 9 years now. I moved to New York in 2012 after graduating with a political science degree. And the next logical step is, of course, doing comedy. And so I did that. I studied at the Upright Citizens Brigade and the People's Improv Theater, doing improv and sketch comedy. But that wasn't always the plan. I wanted to, in college, I wanted to change the world. I wanted to help people. And so I thought, I love politics. I'm going to run for office eventually and, go to law school first and see where that goes. And I got hit with a 1-2 punch. First of all, my aunt was killed, and it was tragic and sudden and unexpected. And I'll never forget being at the funeral after just a couple weeks of just, mourning and feeling sorry for ourselves. And I remember cracking a joke that my cousin looked at me and she laughed and she goes, "You can't say that here." And it was just mentioning that if this is a celebration of life, why isn't anybody celebrating? Like, why didn't we bring in a keg? Why aren't we partying right now? Mm-hmm. And the first 3 letters in funeral are fun. What's going on here? And just that simple shift in perspective and allowing somebody else that was going through the same dark times as I was and making them laugh made me realize that, oh, I want to do this for the rest of my life. That was one of the 1-2 punch, and the other was just the disheartening realization going through political science classes that politics are about politics and not people. And that bothered me. And those two things happening in conjunction and realizing that I can make people laugh for a living, that's what prompted me to move to New York. And then it's just my study in human behavior and positive psychology really helped me transition into the speaking world and do a little bit of both. So now I do stand up. I perform all over the country when I'm allowed to again. And I've been featured in a couple different comedy festivals, and I've spoken to hundreds of audiences now about using humor in the workplace. And that's my mission now. That's my life's work at this point, is teaching people to use humor strategically in a way that engages themselves, their teams, and helps teams pivot into the 21st century workplace, which is a much different workplace than even 10 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
Long story short.
My wife is into this whole generational thing, and there are now 5 generations in the workplace, and you can talk to us perhaps about how you can come up with humor for that all 5 generations will understand. My reference is now to movies and such. No one knows what I'm talking about.
Right. Well, everybody has a story. Everybody has that common thread that brings our lives together. We all have the crazy cousin, or the drunk uncle, or maybe you are the drunk uncle. But we all have that. We all have like a common thread. We all have a family. We all have those friends that we spend time with. We all have pets, kids, whatever. And if we can connect on common ground, we'll learn things about one another that maybe we didn't expect to learn, and build connection from there. So it doesn't matter what generation or culture or whatever. We all have those common threads. We all have problems. We all have specifics in our lives that we can all connect on. And it's just a matter of asking questions of the other person, rather than, as I'm contradicting myself by talking about myself, rather than talking about yourself the whole time. And that's one of my favorite things to do. Unfortunately, when it comes to stand-up, a lot of it is based around what I'm saying and sharing my point of view, rather than questioning the audience. But if I ever get a heckler, that's always my go-to move, is try to find out a little bit about them, find that common ground, and then I'll probably have a joke about it that makes it feel like it's we're coming up with that on the spot.
Well, I think a lot of bosses have hecklers out in the audience.
Oh yeah,
really?
100%. We all have hecklers, right? On some level.
Every boss has a heckler out there who's questioning what they're doing.
Yes. Yes. And that's one thing that performing comedy has helped me with. And that's a message that I'm trying to translate into the business world, is, we're always met with difficult people. We're always met with difficult, unexpected situations. Yeah. So as a comic, it's my job to ask questions, to look beyond that situation and see what else is underneath that, and kind of pick it apart from as many different angles as I can. And if more leaders had that skill set, we'd move on from problems faster. We'd be open to disruption. And I mean, there's any number of benefits that come to that mental agility.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about the misperceptions of using humor at work? Obviously, we have people in our political world now who don't really know how to use humor.
Sure. Well, and
it's gotten them into big trouble.
Yeah, we were just talking about Mr. Cuomo, and I was just kidding. You can't use that for every bad decision you make. Just kidding. You've never rear-ended somebody and said, "Isn't this kidding?" Yeah, I'm so funny. The misperception of humor is that it is always funny. Humor it's a subjective psychological process of solving two competing thoughts going on in our heads at the same time. And usually it presents us with a new perspective. So for example, at the beginning of this pandemic, chances are pretty good you weren't like, all right, a pandemic. This is exactly like I had this in my plans. But being able to connect that with the idea that it's an opportunity is an example of using humor. You find all the different ways that you can connect those two things. So I always like to say that life hands us problems. Those are your setups. It's up to you to come up with the punchlines. Those are your solutions. And humor is the tool that connects those two things. So setups to solutions, problems to punchlines. So really, if we look at humor as a process of like a creative thinking process of, connecting a current problem or a longstanding problem with a new idea, or a new problem with an old idea, something like that. Humor allows us that freedom to interrupt our linear thinking patterns and to kind of think a little bit more creatively, try something new, and see how that connects with the solution that we're looking for. So the misperception of humor is that it is always involving jokes and kidding and ribbing on one another and trading barbs, and that's really unfair. Those are elements of humor, but that's not humor in and of itself. Humor in and of itself is a pretty wide umbrella that falls just under that creativity umbrella.
Yeah. Do you think, in particular, the boss is afraid of using humor because he might not then be taken seriously?
Well, more than ever. I mean, I think, that this perception that as in a leadership role that you have to
Yep.
be, this person that has all the answers, and, you can't be seen as having a weakness or vulnerability. But I think that separates us on a human level. If you're somebody who is never wrong, like, would you rather hang out with somebody or would you rather work for somebody who has all the answers and is never wrong and, has an answer for everything? Or would you rather work with the person who's willing to say, I don't know, let's work together and figure this out together? And so using humor in that way, not only humanizes our leaders, but it level sets. So, if you're an employee and you see your boss laugh at their own mistakes, and what happens next is vital. If you laugh at your own mistake, adjust, take a new action, and get a new result, that sends a powerful subconscious message to your team that, oh, if it's okay if I make a mistake. Because if we're working from that place of fear, that if I make a mistake, I could lose my job, where our creativity shuts down, right? Both sides of our brain can't be firing on all cylinders at the same time. So what that does is it creates a sense of comfort that it's okay to try something new, mess up, as long as I'm able to, if I laugh about it, as long as I'm able to pivot, learn from what happened, and do something new to create the desired result.
Yeah. Great.
I've worked with a lot of bosses who can't be seen, laughing at themselves, and I'll tell you what, every place that I worked that was like that, turnover rate was way too high.
No, I'm sure that's true. Peggy, who was the presidential candidate the third party candidate? You heard him speak once in Kansas City.
Oh, Ross Perot.
Ross Perot. Ross Perot is on the stage, and he said that someone asked him a question. He says, I'm all ears. And of course, he had very large ears. And then he kind of chuckled to himself. That made him very human.
And very quickly too. That's a well-timed joke. And I mean, that's not even that complex of a joke. It's just stating the obvious in a different way. That can really create a sense of connection in an instant. That's the beauty of humor, is if we're able to laugh together, that's an instant sign of unconscious trust.
No, those are all good reasons to use humor. So you made the point that we need humor in the workplace more than ever. Things have been pretty grim the last year.
Yeah, I mean,
and there's lots of things you can't joke about. People are really dying from COVID-19, and lots of people know people. So what do you do?
Well, I think I mean, it depends on what you're joking about. Again, humor isn't necessarily telling jokes about something. As a comic, if I want to approach a touchy topic, I follow a few rules. Number one, I have to make sure my audience feels better than they were before I tell this joke. And so if I even have to ask that question, is this going to make them feel better? I wait a little bit before I decide to use that until it's in a place where I'm confident. The second is I have to be able to stand by what I say. And that's true from a leadership standpoint too. You have to be able to back your perspective on things. And humor is just a different packaging on a person's perspective. So, if I tell a joke and somebody says that's not funny, I know your side of the argument better than you do already, because when I tell a joke, I research it. I make sure that what I'm saying I can stand by. And if I can't stand by that, then I'm sorry, I won't tell that joke again. But
Yeah.
in a workplace setting, I think creating connection with your team is the first thing that we have to do. And one of the best ways to do that, especially now, is to say, I don't know. I'm going to do everything that I can to help. I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure we come out on the other side. I was just talking with the CHRO of an accounting company based out of St. Louis or Columbia, Missouri,
Yeah.
a little bit earlier. And she was talking about how a lot of the partners at her firm weren't willing to show that vulnerability. Like they would, if somebody would ask them a question, they'd have the answer, even though it wasn't the right answer. And that sets us back a little bit further. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay. There's no way we can have all the information. And so
Right.
putting on this facade of perfection is it's self-defeating.
We have a couple of questions. One
Sure.
person, Yin Choi, wants to know, how does one cultivate the ability to recognize and point out humorous qualities in a situation? And that kind of goes to what you were saying. You want to make sure that somebody isn't offended if you think it's funny and they don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, there's any number of ways. First, I like to just kind of write everything down that any observation that I can make about the situation. A lot of times the situation itself isn't what's funny. So, you see comics making jokes about like a national tragedy or something. Chances are they aren't talking about the actual, like the tragedy itself. They're joking about either their own point of view of it. Like, this is what I thought of it, and isn't that funny? So whereas the joke is now about themselves. That's the first place that I like to start if I'm approaching a sensitive topic, or if I have to, tell somebody that I'm working with that what they're doing isn't working. There's a way to approach that isn't quite so accusatory. But I like to start from an observational point of view. Like, what do I see? What do I feel about it? What am I thinking about it? And, squeeze that orange dry and then move on. So, okay, now I know my own perspective on it. How would other people think about this? What are other points of view that I might consider here? And then I do the same thing. I squeeze that dry until I can't think of anything else. And then I try to find a way to connect the two. So it's really leaning into your observational skills. What else is here? Because we're very quick to make snap judgments as human beings, right? We see something, we immediately classify it as good, bad. This is going to help me. This is going to hurt me. Just like COVID at first, this is going to ruin my entire business. I lost a ton of speaking gigs. I lost all of my comedy gigs. All of a sudden I had no money coming in. And at first I'm very resistant to that, but then being able to take a step back, and it also helped that I got COVID, believe it or not. After a couple of weeks of being miserable, I started finding the humor in my own thought process about it. So so it's a matter of looking at something and then continuing to ask yourself, well, what else is true? What else is here? Rather than just being married to that first opinion, that first judgment.
Yeah. So why don't you talk about the skills of a stand-up comic? I like that section in your overview.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, a comic's job is to take a topic and look at it from as many points of view as possible, as I was already kind of talking about. We have to consider as many different perspectives on a topic as possible if we really want to write a strong bit. But when you bring that to the stage, you have to connect with the audience. If you don't have a sense of trust built with the audience, what reason do they have to even listen to you? And this translates into the professional world. If you don't have a sense of connection with your coworkers, with your employees, why should they trust you to make the right decision? So you have to establish that from the get-go. When you get on stage, you have 30 seconds pretty much before the audience makes up their mind if they're going to like you or not. And so it's a matter of finding that common ground quickly and then building off of that so that the audience knows that they can trust you, that you're going to guide them to a safe place at the end. You're going to build the tension and you're going to break it on a regular basis. and they'll be along with you on that ride. And so those are skills that we can use from a leadership perspective. But the defining factor of what a leader does is a leader takes accountability for the results. So a comic can look at a problem from so many different points of view and poke holes in it in so many different ways. So those skills are valuable from a leader's perspective and from a comic's perspective. But what the leader does that's different is that the leader takes accountability and says, what can we do about it? Whereas the comic just makes observations, and we have a shared experience around those observations between audience and performer.
Yeah. So you mentioned vulnerability. I think that's an important skill in a leader too, is to allow yourself to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I work with a CEO of a PR company in New York, and he allows his employees to see him fail and fail miserably. And but it really just level sets. It puts him on a human level where people now want to help him because he's willing to show that side. Now there's you can overshare your vulnerability. Like, I don't want to know what sort of conflict that you're having with your spouse, or what you had for dinner last night and how that's affecting your performance today. There's a such thing as TMI, sure, but being vulnerable isn't just it's not about showing your weaknesses. That's the misperception that vulnerability gets. It's putting yourself on a human level. It's creating that connection. What I used to do, what I would get on stage, is I would try to tell audiences, when I say I've been speaking well since 2019, because before that I would get on stage and I want to share how much I know with my audience, and I didn't make that connection. But now if I open with a story about how I fell on my face and then learn from it, everybody can see a little bit of themselves in that. And so that's our goal as a leader, is, whatever position you're in, whether it's in the C-suite or, you're a frontline manager, whatever it is, if you're able and willing to show that side of you, again, like I said earlier, your team doesn't look at mistakes as the end all be all. They follow your example.
We're all kind of experimenting out in this world today. Anyone who tells you they know how the COVID-19 is going to play out, and I'm not talking about the health issues, I'm talking about the business issues. I don't know, maybe this is a good time to buy cruise ships. Who knows?
Yeah,
I doubt that one though. I really.
Right, you'll be able to get them a discount. That'll be your personal vehicle. Let's say, hey, let's go for a ride out on the boat.
Yeah, if Trump had any money, I'm sure he would buy one now, because they're pretty cheap.
And does your boat have a pool?
Yeah, somebody mentioned, would you like to talk about, because somebody mentions the importance, whether it's East culture or West culture, that humor helps break boundaries. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great topic.
Absolutely, it is.
I introduced the idea to you that we have multiple generations who have different senses of humor.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does vary culture to culture. It varies neighborhood to neighborhood too. I always tell this story about how I grew up Catholic. So I have, of course, a few jokes about that experience and going through church as a kid. And so I was booked, this was last January, I was booked to speak for a group of 150. And I had the Catholic bit worked in. I was going to tell some of those jokes because none of them are very controversial. It's just the perceptions of a kid in church. And there was an empty table in the front of the room, 8 empty chairs, and all the other tables are filled up. And it was about 5 minutes before it was my time to get on stage. And all of a sudden, 8 nuns in full habit, the full get up walked in, and they sat at that table. And very quickly, I knew that if I wanted to connect with the rest of the room, I had to cut those jokes out because everybody's going to be looking at this one table, right? So it's knowing the audience. You can't try to force something that isn't there. And it really, when it comes to cultures, you have to know where people are coming from. Like if I were to get booked in Dubai to do a show, or in Hong Kong, I'm going to study their culture, figure out what's funny to them. And that's the beauty of the internet, is I can look any of these things up rather quickly and get a feel for it. I could maybe even reach out to, somebody through LinkedIn, or because we're more connected now than ever. So, you know, if I'm doing a show out there, I'll find maybe a second or a second contact through LinkedIn and reach out to them and ask, you know, what are some of the sensibilities I should be worried about? Would this work? Would this work? Would this not work? So we have that opportunity. If you're not pivoting to the room, if you're not pivoting to the person that you're making the joke in front of, you're not doing your job as a comic, and you're not doing your job as a leader. You know, you're not going to talk about, you know, say somebody just lost their dog. You're not going to make a joke about dogs the day after. You know, you have to know who you're talking to, and you're not going to please everybody all the time. If you're in a room, if there's 100 people in the room, chances are one person at least is not going to like one of your jokes. So
Yeah.
it's a matter of making
And
that
you have to be
connection.
able to live with that. I worked for the Thompson Corporation in the 1990s, and the operation ended up being in Minnesota.
Mhm,
I'm from the Midwest originally, near Chicago.
mhm.
So I sort of have a Midwest sense of humor, but I worked in New York City with, I'm Jewish, I work with Italians and Irish, and we all loved a good fight. It was all in great fun, but we had loud arguments. You do not have loud arguments in Minnesota.
No, not at all.
They don't do loud arguments.
Right. It almost sounds, it's almost like you're on a date when you're having an argument in the Midwest. I mean, you know,
You gotta be careful with the cultural differences.
you absolutely do. You have to know, you know, who you're speaking to. And again, it always goes back to the common ground. We all have families. We all have, you know, experience with dogs and cats. You know,
Yeah.
I can walk into any room and have a good half hour of material that can connect at least on some level with everybody. It might not be funny, but no one's going to be leaving the room saying, you know, feeling offended.
Yeah. Well, I think that maybe you can comment on this. I know you've been doing this corporate thing for a long time, but I think there are more sensitivities in the workplace now than there used to be. It seems to me everybody in the world has a chip on their shoulder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everybody's, not everybody, I hate saying everybody's a certain way, but there are a lot of people that have their guard up in a professional situation. And I think that's detrimental to the workplace experience. I want to work with a fellow human being. You know, I want to be there for you when you need me. You know, we need to at least have some sort of connection on a personal level. And I think when we break down those barriers and build that sense of trust through conversation, through asking questions, through offering to help, you know, even if it's something as small as, you know, oh, I'm done with my work a little bit early. Is there anything I can help you with? Or setting up, and now we're doing things virtually. So setting up a 10-minute conversation to talk about, you know, oh, I just finished watching the Queen's Gambit. What did you think? I mean, just to really connect on that personal level. That's something that the old school way of doing business we need to leave that behind. Just at the rate the world is changing, if we keep that same sort of cultural mentality, we're going to be left behind. It's going to hurt us on an emotional intelligence level. And I mean, I'm all about let's have the brain firing on all cylinders. How can we have that happen? And we have to be able to connect with other humans on a human level, because human beings, number one, our superpower is our ability to cooperate, communicate, collaborate, and care for one another.
Oh,
So,
awesome.
you know, if we can't build those barriers up.
For the last several years, I've had my grandson and granddaughter living with me. We have a family pod here in Connecticut, and my grandchildren have a lot of screen time with their friends. And I've been curious about the virtual world and how that has affected them. And now I've experienced it for the last year. I don't know if after we come out of this, where we're meeting in person, if I will remember for sure whether I talked to somebody on Zoom or I actually met them in person at some point.
Yeah. Right. I'm not going to be able to recognize you without your house behind you. Right? Just that outside of work context. Oh, I didn't recognize you outside of work. Oh, I didn't recognize you without books behind you. I don't know if you'd
know me without a suit and tie.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that goes to the point that you were making earlier, comment on the fact that I think since COVID, there isn't that sharp demarcation between home and work. And so something probably that was humorous before or wasn't humorous might be more humorous now because we can interconnect. Would you like to comment?
Just before everybody else joined, my cat walked right across in front of the camera. And, that's one of those things that we're all dealing with. But and at first people would either turn off their cameras, like, oh, I don't want you to see that I'm a human. I'm worried about what I look like on camera. We're all in the same boat. I could be wearing my pajama pants. I'm not. I got dressed up for you guys though. So yeah.
But again, I have to share with you, David, that the Chat with Matt started with Seth Meyers and Stephen Colbert. I saw what they were doing. Peggy, these are two shows Peggy and I watch on YouTube many nights. And I realized that no one cared what their background looked like. And wow, Zoom is as close to having your own studio as anything. It works. And to your point, at the last meeting, my housekeeper walked behind me to get into the garage and dump the garbage, This is what you're working from home.
Yep.
Welcome to my home office.
Yep. And do you really want to work with the person who's like, I don't want to see who you are as a human being? That's some supervillain level stuff. Let's lean into the fact that our house is a mess. I mean, my desk is atrocious, but that's how I work. That I'm more than willing to share that side of my life with anybody who's like, oh, it's not that
Perhaps
bad.
we've become more human with Zoom.
In some weird way, I think so. I think that, well, I mean, of course, once we're able to all gather in large groups, we'll have that authentic, that human connection. But I think through Zoom, what I've been doing is I've been able to speak to so many more groups that I wouldn't have been able to if it weren't for this. But I set up calls with members of the board, or I asked them to connect me with some of the rock stars in the group to just kind of get a feel with where they are on a human level. So I'll open the conversation. We'll talk a little about business, a little bit what they're going through with work, and then we'll I'll learn about who they are as human beings. And that's something that in a networking situation, when you're in a room full of people, you're very quickly like, what's my elevator pitch? What's my verbal business card? I have to, tell these people what service I offer and see if there's an interest. Where in this case, I want to know about you. I want to know what you're going through. I know what I'm going through. So for me personally, I've been able to connect on a deeper level with people that I wouldn't necessarily have because of this, as a result of this. And again, that's that kind of outside of the box way of using humor. So, at first, because I'm a people person, I can talk all day. I can talk all of your ears off and still have, energy. But
I would never have guessed, David.
Right? What was the first hint? He's a speaker, he's a comedian, and he hasn't shut up. But I could talk your ear off. But where was I going to go with that? I got distracted. I don't know.
Oh, that's okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Using the isolation aspect of it, being in quarantine after a couple months, I started really feeling down because I wasn't able to interact with as many people. I wasn't able to get in front of an audience. I wasn't able to, one of the best parts of doing comedy is you get to talk to the comics. And as I was saying earlier, the comics, we don't look at life situations like everyone else. We try to pick it apart. We look at it from as many angles. We look at the whole construct. And it was difficult not to be able to have those conversations frequently. But I was focusing on what I didn't have rather than the opportunities that I had in front of me.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's that perspective shift. It's like that, what else is here? That's one trick that I use sometimes if I'm dealing with a difficult person, or if I'm dealing with a difficult situation like this. I'll ask myself, well, what am I grateful for? What am I grateful for about this situation?
I have a question, David, that came to mind as you were talking about the human side and seeing who people are. What is your opinion? So there are a lot of people who have virtual backgrounds that really doesn't necessarily say who they are, whether it's the trees or the snow or the season, but you're not really connecting to them. Mm-hmm. What is your opinion of that versus letting me see the living room or the office where you are and what it is, so that I really get to see the pictures on your wall, what you like, etc. What is your opinion?
I mean, to each their own, I'm not going to, if I were in person and somebody, wore a nondescript white polo with khaki pants, I would be like, well, why aren't you wearing your favorite outfit right now? I would love to see more, about where you live and who you are as a human, sure. But I'm not going to think any less of somebody who
Oh, I
doesn't or
don't
who
think you
doesn't have.
think less of them, but does it become a barrier to you getting to know the human side? That's what I'm looking. You're having a relationship. You're meeting somebody for the first time on networking call. As a matter of fact, there was a question: what do you see as the most your favorite networking question? So I'm networking. I'm meeting somebody for the first time, and they have this virtual background. Isn't that creating a barrier for me to really get to know them because they're not authentic?
It can, but I don't look at it that
Okay.
way that quickly. I more care about the content of what you're talking about. Are you open with sharing about yourself? Because I get it. Some people are self-conscious about what's going on behind them, or the office is a mess, or I don't look great today. I understand that. That's part of the construct of going to work and looking your best and all that. Um, it's all about the content. What questions are you asking? What are you sharing about yourself? Are we having an authentic human conversation? If that's not happening, then I tend to notice the background. It's one of those things where, you pick a perspective when you're talking to somebody. So, if
I
if
think
it's
you learn about people from the background, their office. You learn things. What I know, no one will remember this, but we used to meet people in person at their offices, and one of the things I would always do is look around the office to see what their life was all about. And if they were golfers, they'd have golf stuff. I'm a sailor, I would have sailing stuff
Mhm,
out. And I think that was always I found that very helpful to learning about people.
mhm.
Peggy will laugh at this, but we're members of the Mystic Seaport Museum, and they did a sea shanty thing. Okay, they had all of the people who entertained at the Mystic Seaport Museum in their homes, uh, singing songs, and of course, most of them had musical instruments hanging on the wall. Right, one of the guys had a sailboat that was a clock. I mean, it told you a lot about these people, and I think that's an important thing to. And you should be very open about your background. You should make your office knowing that people are going to be looking into it.
Mhm. I mean, I do appreciate when people have their cameras on. I'm not, yeah, it's not the end all be all,
Yeah,
but
no, I know, I know.
I
if
know.
I can, yeah.
Okay, and let's go back to what do you think is I guess the person said that your favorite networking question in today's environment.
I'd like to ask about people's wins first. I want to know, what your secret sauce is. Like, what would you say is the attribute that you have that has created the most wins in your life? Because in the world that we're in, we have a tendency to kind of focus on the negative. Like, most of us walk into the room and
Oh,
find what's wrong. And that's kind of conditioned into us. You turn on the news and it's not like, here's all the great things that are going on in the world.
yeah, you don't hear about that
Yeah,
stuff.
they usually save that for the end. It's like a bake sale or something that's pretty inconsequential when there's a lot of cool things happening. So I want to find out what the cool things that are happening in your life are first.
Nice.
Somebody said that they said that their favorite was that what are you most thankful for?
That's a good one.
That for that might not have happened without the pandemic.
Yes. Yeah. I send out a survey to groups before I speak. And the first question is, if you could sum up 2020 in one word, what would it be? And the second question is, if it weren't for COVID, or how did you grow in the past year that you wouldn't have if it weren't for COVID? And so it's that, here's how I looked at 2020. And most of the time it's like a negative word. And then the second question is a real quick pivot into, well, how did you grow because of it?
Yeah. So I'm sure you have some stories about the wrong uses of humor at work.
I do. Absolutely.
See, I'm sorry to pivot to the negative, but I thought you would make them funny stories.
Yeah, it's, man, where do I start? I worked in the service industry for 14 years. So that, there was a lot of that, people getting, it's just that, you can't write this stuff, that kind of mentality, those kinds of things happening. Like, you really thought you would get away with that? There's not one that really sticks out because there were so many, just people saying inappropriate things and thinking they were being funny. Crossing the line on just like a sexual level. It's like, wow, that's disgusting. Get out of
Yeah.
here. Like, why would you do that? But I think managers, I don't want to talk about this one story. He got really, really personal on some of the things that he liked to watch online. And it was one of the girls walked out. It was not becoming of a leader, but I've worked for bosses, not necessarily using humor wrong, but it was because I found humor in what they did that engaged me more with them. So, for example, I was working, and I tell this story during my presentations. I was working at I was working in New York City it was a very toxic work environment. It was like our turnover rate was huge. There were always new faces that didn't last long. And one stressful shift, I was working there as a waiter. One of the other servers dropped a tray full of drinks, and everybody just stopped what they were doing and laughed. And it was that laugh that we needed to, kind of ease the tension. And as we were laughing, we all kind of collectively realized that, oh, we're going to get through this stressful night, just like we've gotten through every other stressful night. And then we started getting back to work, but then the manager burst in the room and he just goes, "This is not the time or place to laugh." But I worked at a comedy club. So by
And that was at a
definition,
comedy club?
that was at a comedy club. That is by definition both the time and place to laugh. And that's one of those things, that's one of those shifts where it's like, am I on the set of a sitcom right now? Are you serious? Did no one else hear what he said and where we are? What's going on here? And from then on out, that kind of shifted my perception of that manager. So I would start looking forward to seeing him because he would get mad for no reason. And it was funny to me at first, like before it wasn't. But ever since that moment, it was like, oh, what kind of wacky antics is he going to get into tonight in tonight's episode? It just, I would imagine a live studio audience laughing whenever he would do something that started to make me angry, and it shifted my perception of him. So, it's using humor in that way, in a way that uplifts yourself and can uplift the people around you. And I even told him, I was like, "Did you know that you yelled at us?" And once we developed a rapport after this, did you know that you yelled this thing once? And he goes, "Did I?" He didn't even realize he'd done it. And
I think it goes back to one of your points is self-awareness.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's the first place that I start. If I have writer's block, I always start with myself. Like, what are my thoughts right now? What have I done? What are my actions? What are my feelings on this? And that
Yeah,
usually,
all good stuff.
oh yeah.
So benefits of humor. I think you touched on some of these, but we're getting to the last 15 minutes. So you should
Oh wow.
you should
Okay.
talk about, yeah, time goes by fast when you're
It
having
does.
fun. You knew that.
Yeah, I know. Absolutely. Time is subjective. That's true. There have been so many studies using humor in the workplace, and I could, go through a bunch of them, but it makes us more productive. It improves our communication skills. When leaders use humor, it improves their communication skills. A lot of times when I talk to HR, because I do a lot of speaking for HR, so I like to get in and understand what their problems are. And
Yep.
one of the big ones is a lack of clear communication from leadership, especially now. And that's a negative side effect of, wanting to have all the answers rather than saying, "I don't know, help," because we've never gone through something like this before. Nobody in this room was around in 1918, the last time we had to deal with a pandemic. So, being able to do that improves our communication skills. It puts your team at ease, so they're working from a more creative standpoint. And the creativity aspect of it is, I think, the most important aspect of using humor because of the direction of work. we need our employees to be more creative. We need our employees to be more collaborative. And
Mhm.
if they fear making mistakes, they're not going to come up with that outside of the box idea that might solve whatever problem you're facing. There was a study done where they showed a group a comedy video before solving creative problems.
Mhm.
And they divided subjects into two groups. The other group was shown absolutely nothing. This was a University of Maryland study. Both groups were given the same set of problems to solve. The group that was shown the comedy video solved those problems at a rate of 58% versus 30% of the other group. Same problems, just they were just exposed to positive stimuli. Being able to laugh, it puts us at ease. It releases those chemicals, that cocktail of chemicals in our bodies that counteract the stress, the fear, and it allows us to think about things a little bit differently. When we laugh, it's basically just our brain saying, I haven't looked at it that way before. And so if laughter is a consistent part of your day, of your culture, people are looking at problems differently all of a sudden. We've got all these new problems. You can't have the same mindset as what created those problems. So we've got to humor shakes us out of that limited perspective by allowing us to see more to the situation. If I can give you anything here today, it's this one phrase. It's someday I'm going to look back at this and laugh. So if you're racking your brain trying to find what's funny in a situation, stop. Just tell yourself, someday when I'm ready, I'm going to look back at this and laugh. That simple sentence is a message to yourself that there is more to the problem than the problem. It gives yourself power over the problem, because now, just by saying that, well, if there's something funny here, then there's also something beneficial here. There's also an opportunity here. I can learn something here. I can change something here. I can connect with someone on a different level in a different way here. So someday I'm going to look back at this and laugh.
There's a question here that says, do you have data that goes to companies that embrace humor in terms of retention and sick days?
Yes, actually, the book Happiness at Work studied companies that incorporate fun into their workday. And they found that organizations who are open to using fun as part of their culture, employees use 66% fewer sick days. They were 50% more productive, 50% more motivated, because we're accessing that human side of the work experience. I mean, we tend to close ourselves into these job descriptions, and I have to check off this list of to-dos rather than engaging it in a new way. So what's one new way I can attack my to-do list every day? And just something as simple as that activates our creativity. The misperception of creativity is that, I'm artistic, or I'm really thinking outside of the box, or marching to the beat of a different drum. But we all solve problems. It's just leaning into a new way to solve an old problem. That's a simple way of using creativity.
I think bosses have to be approachable, and if they use humor in the right way, that can be very effective. People like working for people they enjoy being with. And if you're always a severe person, that doesn't really work. I know Steve Jobs was able to write a book about his management style, but I don't think it worked.
Yeah, when you have to put
I
nets
wonder
outside of
how
your
effective he
factories.
could have been if he had a sense of humor. Maybe he could have contacted you and developed one.
I wish. No, maybe my computer wouldn't be broken.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can check all those boxes. You can do everything right as far as, being productive and being, high energy and, workhorse, and you've got the bank account to prove it. But if there isn't a sense of humor there, what's it all for? I mean, if you don't have that ability to connect with people quickly and to build their trust quickly, why even build a team in the first place? You want them to leave the workday feeling as excited as you are, if it's your organization, or if it's something that you're passionate about. And I mean, we're all guilty of treating people in a way that we probably wouldn't like to be treated at work, but it's the realization that we're doing it that sets us apart, and using humor allows us to come to that realization a little bit quicker.
So the chat box is open. We're getting into the last 8 minutes of our conversation with David. Peggy's monitoring the chat box. If you don't put something in there, David and I are going to keep talking.
I think I've been interrupting you pretty good.
I appreciate the
Everybody's
pivots.
been doing a great job. Please, we look for questions. We try to be. It's a large group, and there's this whole TV thing going on where people are they're watching a show. No, you're here as a group, and please feel free to chime in. Maybe you have a story to share.
Yeah, or an idea.
A short story, of course.
Right.
David, any others? I can share a story with you about I always have been quick with a quip.
Well, here's, all right, and then.
And I in the early days of PowerPoint, we were using these translucent things that fit on top of a PowerPoint projector, so the lights had to be out. I felt I was working with a group of lawyers who were boring me to death, and I fell dead asleep. And one of my publishers turned to me, and I always sat down front because I was trying to stay awake. He turned to me and he said, "I hope we're not boring you, Matt." I woke out of a dead sleep and I said, "No, Howard, please drone on." The whole room cracked up, and we took a break.
See, it's the shift. It's that shift that laughing together creates. It's
I think
so
it's
powerful.
important. People like working with people they enjoy being with, and you have to be a little fun. I'm the numbers guy, and I'm in charge of the word no. So you have to be approachable. Or people
Somebody
don't
wanted
talk
to
you.
know, do you suggest any improv classes? This person, Suzanne, said she did one, but it was outside of her comfort zone, even though it was helpful.
It is. I mean, yes, and is the core rule of improv. So if somebody comes to you with a suggestion or an idea, regardless of what your preconceived notions are, your only response is to accept their idea and add to it. And that is the baseline of interpersonal collaboration. We have a habit of saying no to people before an idea is really worked out. A lot of times, think of your first idea when it comes to solving a problem. Probably not the best idea. But if you get a room full of people together, collaborating on solving a problem and pitching ideas back and forth through that yes and lens, through that accepting and adding to each other's ideas, you may end up with an unrecognizable idea that helps solve the problem that is totally different from the first idea, but you wouldn't know that if you were to say no or yes, but. MIT did a study about this, and they found that improvisers, they compared improvisers and product designers, and the improvisers came up with 20% more product ideas than the people whose job it was to come up with product ideas, because instead of trying to claim credit, they were accepting each other's ideas and adding to them rather than telling each other no.
Yeah, and I read an article that said that, because I've done a lot of things on multi-generational, and a lot of, especially millennials, find that if you say yes, but, they feel like all you've done is negate what they said. So it's not just that what you've said is 100% true, but then there's that other piece. We don't want to negate anybody. And so that's taking away. So that's another purpose of yes and, says anything
Yes and is a
is
good
not
tool.
negative.
You
Yeah,
have a
people feel
question in the
heard.
box, and we touched on this earlier, David, about the political correctness today, and I'm maybe you can comment on how this has made humor in the workplace so much harder.
I think it has to be a more precise humor. You can still use humor in the workplace. I think as a comic, I want the audience to leave the room feeling better than they did when they got there. So the same rule applies to the workplace. I always tell leaders who are hesitant to use humor to adhere to your company values. If the joke that you're going to use doesn't fall under that umbrella, if it doesn't agree and vibe with your company values, your mission, your beliefs as an organization, then you know right away not to use that humor. It's all about connecting with the other person first, though, and building a culture where and it happens, somebody says something appropriate, the person that it was directed towards feels comfortable going to that person and having an adult conversation saying, I appreciate you trying to use humor to diffuse a situation. I didn't appreciate how it made me feel. And then, approaching that situation with the trust that the other person, the person who used that humor, will be on board with them and say, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking, what can I do better next time? That's a big part of using humor too, is to put the culture in place where that sort of conversation can happen. I hate when I hear comics say, oh, you can't joke about anything anymore, you can't say anything anymore. I look at it as you can, but you have to say it differently. You have to approach it differently. You have to, like, your goal is to create satisfied customers, whether you're a comedian or you own a Fortune 500 company. That's the goal. So if what you're doing is offending those customers, then either, you have to question your strategy for approaching that situation.
So we're wrapping up here, David. What did we forget? Must be something we forgot to cover.
Oh, if you want to learn more about this, I'm doing a webinar next week, and next Thursday, April Fool's Day, at 1 p.m. for the training associates.
Huh?
Yeah, I know, right? It's weird how that happened. But it's at 1 p.m. It's if you go to the training associates. Oh man, I should.
Why don't you type it into the chat box and people can copy it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And any other last questions for David? I not only start my meetings on time, I try to end them on time. Everybody's been very kind to stay with us for this hour.
That is fair. Yeah, my podcast is called You Can't Laugh at That. We bring in comedians. We look at topics that are offensive or have been on any level. They can be, mundane topics, and we figure out why they're funny using talking to a comedian who has made a joke about that topic. So You Can't Laugh at That. I also have been bringing in CEOs and business leaders with well-regarded cultures, and kind of paralleled the skills of a comedian to the skills of a successful leader. And so it's a little bit of both in that. You can learn more about what I do at watercoolercomedy.org. You can reach out to me personally if you have a situation or are looking for leadership development, anything like that. We can have a quick phone call. I want to learn a little bit about you. And yeah, that's all at watercoolercomedy.org. Hold on, let me get the
David's
link.
David's on LinkedIn, I assume, as is
I am on
everybody
LinkedIn.
in the entire world.
And
David,
somebody,
if there's a message you'd like to send out to the group, I can send a post-meeting message to our attendees.
Yeah, I'm
or at least
pulling
the
up that link right
registrants.
now.
and I just want you to know, David, that somebody Paul writes in that he wants to thank you for entertaining and insightful discussion. He says, you know what? He's heading back to bed because it's 5 a.m. in Malaysia.
Oh, man.
He's still in his pajamas. So I thought you would find that humorous.
That's great.
That's great. Yeah.
That's our modern world.
Mhm.
Well, David, I'm going to spotlight you. I want to thank you for coming to chat with Matt.
Thank you.
So again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Meetings in my world start and end on time. I just want to remind everybody that the FENG is a not-for-profit. We live primarily on voluntary donations from our members. So if you have a couple bucks you can spare, I hope you'll when you visit our website, you'll make a donation. That's how we support ourselves and bring you all these wonderful programs. Next Tuesday, again, I have a very nice guest speaker that my wife Peggy rounded up, called Todd Churchus, I believe. Visual leadership. So Peggy's helped me bring some famous people into our chat with Matt fold.
And he was just, I think, selected as one of the Amazon 10 best new business books.
And it'll be announced in tonight's newsletter. Again, you just visit our web sport chapter section of the website, and you can register for the meeting. We'd love to see you there. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining me on Chat with Matt, and thank David again for a wonderful show. And we'll see you again. Stay well. And again, we'll see you on Chat with Matt. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Everybody, thanks for all your questions.
And thank you, everybody.